Plus, we'll pick up again on that story out of Victoria last night of a trans woman, so biological male, currently imprisoned in a women's jail. Outrage today has turned to the leniency of the sentence, 4 years and 9 months, for sexually abusing their own daughter. But get this, it comes with a 2.5-year non-parole period. Calls now for the Victorian Premier to act.
These are sentences that are not in line with community expectations. That is why we will make sure we will review all of the sentencing here in Victoria.
We will stay with this issue, and I should say up front that this is very shocking. It's very shocking, some of these details. You'll recall last night, leading women's activist Rachel Wong and I discussed the horrific case of a trans woman, a biological man in other words, currently serving time in a Victorian women's prison for molesting his own 5-year-old daughter to please a chat room male friend, and whose appallingly short sentence was shortened further on the grounds that he was a female subject to coercive control. That he was a female, even though the prosecution's material tendered in court about the graphic nature of the father's abuse of his little girl refers to father's penis. Now, please, I know this is hard to discuss, just as it's hard to comprehend, but please bear with me, because unless we all understand what's happening in our courts and in our justice system in this country, signed off by our governments, then it will continue without challenge. And challenge we must this madness. Here are the basic squalid facts as contained in the County Court judgment in the case of the DPP against Maloney. Now, Maloney is a pseudonym given to the offender to protect the identity of his 5-year-old victim, but which also, sadly, protects the perpetrator. A father, referred to by the judge as Hilary Maloney, who sexually abused his 5-year-old daughter, was given a minimum 2.5-year sentence because, at least in part, the judge said his transition to being a woman reduced, quote, his moral culpability. That Maloney had become the, quote, slave of an American pedophile, Sam Booth, and agreed to molest his daughter on camera for the sexual gratification of his, quote, master. Maloney had produced 13 videos and 64 images in just 1 month, all on Booth's instructions to, quote, engage in a variety of sexual and perverse acts with your daughter. Now, today I have read the entire judgment, and let me tell you, the various things that this father has done to his daughter and then filmed them and transmitted them then to this fellow pedophile are simply revolting. To spare you, I won't go into the graphic detail, but it's all there in the court documents. And Maloney knew that it was wrong. His 5-year-old daughter also knew it was wrong because the prosecution says she objected to it, and that was audibly heard in the footage. Yet in sentencing the pedophile, the judge made excuses for Maloney, saying, quote, given Booth's manipulation and coercion and your vulnerabilities, you are much less able to objectively make the right and healthy choices. Now, I pulled up at that phrase, healthy choices. It sounds more like a comment a doctor would make to an unhealthy patient that needs to lose weight, not what a judge says to a father convicted of abusing their own child. It almost makes light or somehow downgrades in some way the horrific nature of his offending. But Judge Nola Karapanagiotidis went on, claiming that the father, now Hilary Maloney, had become vulnerable to Booth, the US pedophile, who'd, quote, cultivated and exploited a relationship with you through affirmation and attention, which in turn validated you as a woman and a sexual person. Validated you as a woman, said the judge. Even though, as I said at paragraph 14 of the judgment, evidence tendered by the prosecution refers to the father's penis in the offending. Again, I'm sorry I have to be so graphic, But if we do not expose the horrific nature of what's being allowed to masquerade as justice in this country, it will never be challenged. Again, and challenge it we must. Justice Karabanagiotis, a former legal aid lawyer, a refugee specialist before appointment to the bench of the county court, claimed that Maloney, the father, will, quote, face additional hardship in prison as a relatively young trans woman. Please. It's that little girl and the mum left to pick up the pieces that deserve our care, our concern and our compassion. When asked about this, the Victorian Premier, normally so vocal in her denunciation of sexual predators, referred all the questions to the Corrections Minister, and for the past 2 days, since the story broke, she has hidden from the media. Today it was her Energy Minister left to try and justify the madness of a biological male pedophile identifying as a woman being housed in a woman's prison.
Do not comment, and we have never commented on individuals nor the placement of individual prisoners. When it comes to the placement of prisoners, that the safety of the entire prisoner population is always considered.
How have we got to a situation in a country like Australia where a father with intact male biology can abuse his own daughter and then rely on the claim that he is a woman? Then he can get a judge to agree that part of the reason the father did it was that as a woman he was subject to the coercive control of another pedophile, a male overseas. And because of all of that, the father gets a reduced sentence. What about the rights of the little girl as a female herself to a childhood of innocence and the love and care of her parents? And how dare that Labor minister try and hide behind decisions made by prison authorities as if we don't know that governments make prison policy, that governments fund our prisons and that governments hire and fire the people that run them. I mean, it's bad enough that this is sanctioned under law in Victoria, but what makes it so much worse is that those we elect aren't even prepared to justify their decisions to the public. Today, the Victorian opposition has made this commitment.
There needs to be a line in the sand that says, no, there are certain things that are not acceptable, and people going into the opposite sex prisons are putting people at risk. That is something that needs to be considered and wouldn't happen under a government I lead.
Now, that's strong there, Brad Batten, but I saw qualifications later attributed to you that brought that back, that said no male should be housed in a women's prison if they are convicted of a sex crime. No. Sorry. No biological men whatsoever. It doesn't matter about their crime. No biological men whatsoever. Put the Liberals to one side. I don't care if you have voted Labor all your life. This cannot continue. This time you cannot vote Jacinta Allen back in. In the name of all that's still good and decent in this world, this Labor government in Victoria must be thrown out. All right, coming up the show tonight too, I've got an interview with Stephen Nowakowski. He's a Queensland conservationist, a long-time Green activist who's campaigning against the desecration of our national parks and prime agricultural land by wind turbines and solar panels, all in the name of saving the planet from climate change. As Stephen says, how can you clear native forests for renewables? This is the biggest oxymoronic policy, and he's right. He and his collaborators called Rainforest Reserves Australia have gone through the publicly available data to produce an assessment of what's called this green transition and what it's doing to our country. To achieve the government's emissions reduction targets, there's almost 1,100 operational and proposed renewable projects. And this is everything, but it does not include transmission lines. Currently, there's just over 4,500 wind turbines in Australia, but under these plans, we're going to see another 25,000. And the area covered by them is set to rise from around 39,000 hectares to almost 200,000 hectares, or almost 2,000 square kilometres. Or let's put it another way, that's a kilometre-wide band stretching from Melbourne all the way through and beyond to Rockhampton in Queensland. Or about the area the size of metropolitan Brisbane. As Nowakowski reports, there's currently 74 million solar panels in Australia, but under the government's current plans, we're going to need another 180 million. And the area covered will need to be increased from around 27,000 hectares, as we have now, to almost 500,000 hectares. Now, again, put that into perspective, that's 4,500 square kilometres, or a kilometre-wide band that stretches from Sydney right across to Perth, or an area as big as the entire Sydney Basin. Now, to pay for all of this environmental desecration, Australia will need to spend $1.3 trillion. $1.3 trillion. And Nowakowski, as I said, he did this analysis as a conservationist. I mean, he's a lifelong green. That's his motivation. He cares about the natural environment. He wants to protect it. Now, finally, it feels like we might be getting to the bottom of this whole renewables are cheap, renewables will save the planet, great big global green scam.